Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. At this time, I call to order the 84th Symposium of the Military Operations Research Society. Please stand for the arrival of the official party and remain standing for the presentation of the colors and the playing of the national anthem. Please be seated. Thank you for joining us this morning. I'm excited to introduce and to turn the program over to our MORS President, Mr. Tom Tunisia.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us. I'm very excited about today. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the 84th MORS Symposium. It's a very special event for us as we gather to celebrate our 50th anniversary of the Society and our community. It's particularly fitting to be here at Quantico, hosted by the Marines, for our celebration in this brand new facility, dedicated to the education and preserving of history. Throughout the week and this year, we will be celebrating the rich history of MORS. With that, it's an honor to introduce to you Dr. George Axt, our Marine Corps sponsor. We'll give our sponsors welcome and keynote introduction.
Well, good morning all. It's great to see a lot of old faces and a lot of new faces as well, and it's great to be back on a military base after about 3 or so years being forced to go to the hotels and shuttling back and forth between Ida and other places. Hopefully we can continue this tradition of the MORS Symposia being on a military base from this point on. When we first started talking about a keynote speaker for this event, it was sometime, I think, last summer, talking to Tom and Susan and some others, and we, sort of the field was wide open. We were kind of banding about who should be the keynote speaker for this. And at that point in time, we had a number of names on the list. And then General Walsh came and took over McCitic. And after about a month or so of General Walsh being in the job, I said, I know the right guy for the keynote speech, and that's my new boss, the Commanding General of McCitic. He has an extreme emphasis on analytical underpinnings for the senior level decisions in the Marine Corps and the department. And he's put a lot of focus on that. He's put a lot of pressure on our organization, which is good. And he actually follows through on that. So when he needs to make a decision, one of the first questions he asks is, where are the numbers? Where's the analytical underpinning? Where's the quantitative evidence to say that we are making the right decision? So I first got to know him several years ago as the DCG, but I came to realize much more so in his current job how he operates in making decisions. And he has asked us to do a number of things. In fact, our organization has pretty much reorganized in order to accommodate the new thrust for analysis within this organization and within the Marine Corps. I could go on about some of the details about what he's asked us to do, but I think without further ado, let me introduce my boss, Lieutenant General Robert Whaler Walsh.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. The first thing I'll start off with by saying is thanks for Tom Denisha, the president here, and all the MORS staff for pulling this together, but also the industry, DOD, and academia professionals that are here. And I really I thank you for coming here, and I look forward to the interaction that you have here as our institutional partners. I'll start off by saying when Dr. asked me to do this, I was very hesitant to accept this. To walk into this crowd, I mean, I could feel the intellectual rigor that's in this room. And I said, George, I'm not sure if I fit in that environment to be able to do that. And so I looked at that and said, okay, it's a very humbling. So when we talk about analysis, George, I really question George's analysis of putting me into this position. So, George, did you do any analysis at all to put? He's shaking his head no. So that'll tell you why I've got such a challenge there at McCitic. But with that said, is very proud of your accomplishments. You go back in history. You look all the way back to the days of World War II with convoy operations. How we used operations research and analysis to be able to reduce times for those convoys. We looked at the Battle of Britain and reducing the number of artillery rounds, anti-aircraft rounds that were fired up into the sky. All of that required analysis to be able to make us more operationally effective. Like your predecessors, you represent one of America's greatest strengths, and I really truly mean that. It's a fusion of our national security professionals, the innovative industry-leading community of companies and universities that have done so much for this country. And I really mean that when I say when you bring all those people together in a setting like this, but we try to do it every day in everything we do. But take advantage of being together. I've looked at your breakout, your working groups, very impressive. It gives you so many opportunities from the analytical side on the concepts to rigorous analysis going on into individual programs and more on the tactical side or technical side. And I'll try to give you a feel for where I am comfortable. I did talk to George is don't try to get into your business and try to, tell you how to be better analysts, because I certainly am not comfortable with that. But what I can do is kind of walk you through how I approach analysis and the senior leaders I work with and what I find works so very well and why I think it really is, as George said, the underpinning of really everything we do to try to make decisions. So I'm confident that you're going to have a good session here. I've looked at your schedule. But as I welcome you here to Quantico, just a little background on Quantico. Why I think this is such an important setting here at Quantico. Prior to World War I, the Marine Corps, very closely as we are today, very closely integrated with our partner, the United States Navy. We had Marine barracks across the country that were always tied to Navy yards. So the ships were there with the Navy yards and the Marine barracks were tied to the Navy. And that's really where our organizational structure was set up. In World War I, though, as the war was expanding and the U.S. was getting ready to get involved in heavy land combat, and there was a big decision on whether the Marine Corps should be involved in that. And when the decision was made to do that, we looked for a base. We really didn't have a base with training and operating areas. And we looked across up and down the East Coast, and we settled on Quantico as that location. And one of the main things I find interesting as we go back and look at why they settled on Quantico, one of the things they wanted to do was make sure it was close to Washington, D.C. Leadership within the military, but also leadership within Congress. And that served us very well, having this capability here with our training ranges and all the capability that we've got here. So you're coming to a place that back then, from these piers here at Quantico, we sent out regiments that, and brigades that went to World War I and over to France. We also, though, at that time stood up the Marine Corps Schools Command. And from that Marine Corps Schools Command was a lot of our intellectual work that was done to transform the Marine Corps throughout the interwar years after World War I. And it was during that time period that we did a lot of the things that you saw that made the United States Marine Corps, United States Navy so successful in World War II as we developed combat. From the Marine Corps Schools Command, we developed the Marine Corps Development and Education Command. So from that schools, we brought in development, combat development, and did all that work that was really done here. And then to this day, we've got the Marine Corps Combat Development Command. And so that is what Quantico is. And as I kind of just explained to you what we do here, I think you'll see why I call Quantico the engine of change for the Marine Corps. Right here, we've got underneath McCitic, we've got our Futures Directorate, which works all the Marine Corps concepts. Those concepts right now, we're in the final rewrite of our capstone operating concept, Expeditionary Force 21, which is really trying to take the Marine Corps after 14, 15 years of land combat on where do we need to go into the future, which again drives back a lot of the things that operations research can do for us. So from those operating concepts that we develop here, whether they're functional or operating concepts, everything we do is a concepts-based capability development system. So those concepts drive what we have here is the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. And within that Warfighting Lab, we've got a Wargaming division, we've got a Science and Technology division, and we've got a Experimentation division. So you can see within that Warfighting Lab, we're able to take the concepts, bring together, experiment, wargame, try to work to where we need to go, turn that over to my Capabilities Development Directorate, which then builds that into requirements, and then works very closely with Marine Corps Systems Command and our PEO land systems, which are right here also at Quantico, which is a huge advantage for us. And then finally, underneath McCitic, after we've developed the requirements, we also have our Training and Education Command right here also. So that feedback loop of developing the requirement from the concept, feeding it into the training of our Marines so it continues and is successful, the education of the Marines, and then the continuous feedback loop that we continue to do that combat development piece. So I think that's it's a unique setup, and you can see why I'm able to use operations research so effectively by using it throughout all that combat development continuum as we brief up the senior leaders. But I won't lie to you, I mean, one of the main reasons that I feel I'm so successful at this is because I read the book, Moneyball, The Art of Winning. And I also saw the movie. And it was a great movie. I love that movie. I love baseball, too. So, but sincerely, from an F-18 pilot perspective, I think one of the things that really taught me early on in my career on analysis is if you look at a pilot, and certainly a fighter pilot, you look at all your operations checklists, they're all really written in blood. All that is analysis a lot after the fact. How did we have a mishap? How do we learn from that? And a lot of research and analysis goes into that on the aviation side. I think also all the tactics we develop, from our concepts all the way through the requirements development into the tactics, are all based on a lot of operations research. And early on, I was in my career, I was a Top Gun instructor. And I became very intently interested in the work of the late Colonel John Boyd. Probably many of you are familiar with John Boyd with the OODA loop, Observe, Orient, Decide, Act. I think it's very keen to anything we do, not just in fighter tactics, but certainly when you're trying to outpace an adversary, using John Boyd, an Air Force colonel who worked a lot of this. But I think the key part was he developed the maneuvering diagrams that looked and did a lot of research into our own aircraft performance and the enemy's aircraft performance. And our tactics manuals and what we taught at Top Gun and to all our fleet pilots was really immersed in understanding the performance of those maneuvering diagrams. And if you really followed what those maneuvering diagrams did and followed the analytical rigor that was behind those, you won. If you didn't, you lost. So the idea of fighter pilots fly by the seat of their pants, the ones that fly by the seat of their pants typically don't win, because they haven't backed up what they did with a lot of the analysis that went behind the maneuvering diagrams that were developed behind those aircraft. So I think learning in that environment, trying to understand why analytics is so important, was a lot of the driver from what I saw there. The other thing I think is at the Naval Academy is a lot of the coursework, calculus, physics, probability of statistics, and a lot of data analytics we did there. One of the favorite courses I had was mathematics methods of optimization. So when I finally got my degree and finally got back out into the Marine Corps as a young second lieutenant, was stationed here, had just gotten married, and my wife and I were here as second lieutenant. And I wanted to really start to apply some of that stuff that I've learned in mathematics in optimization and look at that. And one of the things we did back in those days, we starched our camouflage utilities. And I don't know exactly why we did that. Camouflage utilities are something you wore out in the field when you were out there operating in a field environment, not like our service dress uniforms, but we would starch them. And we would go through a rigorous process of applying lots of starch and ironing them and trying to go through all that. And I was watching my wife go through that one day, and I looked at that and said, there's got to be something to be able to do more efficiency when it comes to starching that. It was taking her like an hour to go through the process. So I applied the optimization methods, went through that, looked at the best way to do that, and I sat down with her and explained what the process needs to be. And as I went through that process, I don't know if she was impressed or not. I did reduce the time down to about 15 minutes that I was able to do in the future after that. So there's some lessons learned in that is don't look a gift horse in the mouth, and certainly not your wife. But I think it tees up a few lessons learned for analysts as you kind of work through your profession. The first thing I would say is presenting and applying your operational research findings requires people skills. And I think that's one of the things that all of you have to challenge, that you get into the operations research. Some of you can be in a small microcosm doing work in a back room. Others are out there in the operating forces integrating very closely and interacting and developing those people skills to try to work with the data and analysis behind it. But I think it requires people skills and a lot of human dynamics to be able to take your findings and present that in a way that translates well to your audience. So that's a people skill. That's kind of the art we talked about earlier. A lot of science, but a lot of art with it. And trying to explain to decision makers what that underpinning would be. The other piece I would say is change is hard. If anything I would say is what we're trying to do here is a lot of change, and the Commandant of the Marine Corps has us trying to push for a lot of change. And change is hard. And I say change is hard because in a lot of ways when you take analysis and apply that to a change, that means sometimes that people are doing it wrong. And that invites animosity and friction. So I think that's one of those things when you have change and you present it, it threatens people's value proposition. Somebody's down a path with their value proposition and they think they've got it right. And now you're going to challenge that with analysis, with the work that you've done. And then a lot of it's their fear and their ability to adapt, and how they can adapt to the change that you're asking them to make and get out of their comfort zones. And as I look at organizations, when you push them for change, a lot of times it's the leader at the top or the senior leaders at the top that are supporting the leader at the top, along with the young people at the bottom that are really trying to work that change. The young people want to see it. They see things not working the way it needs to be. The leaders want to develop change. But it's that other, I don't know, 50 to 75% that are in that middle that are very comfortable in where they're at, and they don't want to change. So the analysis that can be irrefutable, if you can get there, really can help people be really comfortable in working towards change. So I think, you know, as I look at what we do here at the Marine Corps Combat Development Command, as Dr. Axe said, is just about every decision we make, I try to get some analysis or analytical rigor behind it. So when I can get up and we can brief it, or some of my majors or my generals get up to brief something, we've got the analysis behind it, that somebody, and keep the emotion out of it, but try to show the analysis and show why we're trying to drive to a solution to a problem that we've been presented. One of the things the Commandant gave us is a real challenge that Dr. Axe's team has really been helping with is, in the Commandant's planning guidance, he asked us to do a force structure review of the entire Marine Corps and see how we should change the Marine Corps for the future based on where we see the future operating environment, the threat where Marines should be operating, after really coming out of a lot of land combat in Iraq and Afghanistan. So as we went through that process, I started off here at Quantico, and we brought in about 200 folks from across the Marine Corps, operators, staff people, but really brought them together and kind of looked at what we wanted to kind of the Marine Corps to be. Look at the future operating environment, try to shape that. And then after that was that we had those 200 people together. We're here for a couple of weeks. Well, I then broke that down because that's way too big of a group to get at any details, but they really started to frame the problem and really help us with that. And then we broke that down into two groups, a scarlet and a gold team. Two groups that were about, I think we had about maybe 15 people in each group that developed courses of action for the Commandant and senior leadership. They went through that process and developed those two courses of action for about a month, presented to senior leadership when the Commandant and senior leadership at one of our executive offsites. The Commandant agreed, shaped what those courses of action should look like, and then we turned in the last 2 weeks, we've war-gamed those courses of action at the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force and the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Force. Both took a COA, worked that. When I leave here today, I now am going from that wargaming that we did to meet with about a dozen brigadier generals that are now on a group that's going to kind of pull that together, what's been wargamed, synthesize that, and bring that to the Commandant and senior leadership in July to be able to make a decision on a COA, probably a hybrid COA from the two, that we will then do the .mil PF work in phase 2 throughout the fall. So come February, we make structure changes, equipment changes, and personnel changes. Every step of the way, I've had Dr. Axe's folks helping with that, with the analysis. And some of it's not easy. Some of it's clearer when you're trying to get maybe throughput on precision weapons. That might be easier than trying to take a concept and go, hey, subjectively, information warfare, how is information operations going to help us to be more effective on the modern battlefield? That's more difficult, but we've got a lot of different models and tools that we've got to be able to do that. Some of that, just survey tools that we can get subjective analysis by people that are involved in the process, that they're collating, bringing together, but be able to put some type of rigor at the end of it so we can present it to senior leadership with something rather than just emotions. And if anything, what I've said is try to take the emotion out of it. Don't just because the one with the loudest voice in the room gets the decision made. Pull the analysis behind it so we can present that. And I think that's an example of how we're really using analysis to try to get change in the Marine Corps as a good start point for complex issues. The other thing I would say too is, we talked about this a little bit earlier, is today everything's being digitized. So I think this is an opportunity, but it's also a real challenge for analysts as we see everything becoming digitized and the overwhelming amount of data that's out there. We see it on the battlefield. on command and control. How much information is there, and how do we synthesize that down for all the way down to the small unit level, company commanders, without overwhelming them and slowing down their operations tempo? We want to speed up their operations tempo with decision-making behind the amount of information that's coming at them. But I think there's a tremendous amount of variation that's involved, and I think analysts can help us sift through on what's useful and what's clutter. And I think that's a key piece that, as we go forward, is critical. So I think, in a lot of ways, you make things real. You help us capture data, understand it, process it, extract value from it, visualize it, and then effectively communicate it. It's a very unique skill that I think you all bring, and I can tell you that it's very, very effective in everything that we do here. As George said, I would call myself really a voracious consumer of operations research products, and I think it's intrinsic to everything we do in the combat development process. And I'll just kind of highlight 5 areas to give you some specifics. People go, well, what are you talking about, and how do you use it? I kind of went through the first one, underpinning organizational change. So whenever we go through organizational change, so right now, the Marine Corps, just like the other services, we've gone from 202,000 Marines going down to 182,000. That's where we see where we're headed. So from a zero-sum game, that's what we're going to get, 182,000 Marines. Now, how do we organize that within there? Information warfare is an area that over the last 14, 15 years, dealing against Taliban, Al-Qaeda in Iraq, we haven't had to deal with the type of threats we're seeing out there with near-peer competitors, and I think the United States Navy, the same thing. When you look at the capabilities the Russians and the Chinese are developing, you can see that we're behind in a lot of ways with those higher-end capabilities that we need. But when you do that, like information warfare, it's zero-sum. What's it coming out of? To add how much? What do you have to take away? Where are you willing to take risk? So that organizational analysis to take a lot of those subjective inputs that we're doing in these war games and come up with some force structure assessments. I think that's one. Defensible requirements is a second one. And I'll talk to you some examples on that, but being able to convince senior leaders, DOD, up at Congress, on why we're coming up with the requirements we have with unassailable analysis behind it, so they agree with the path that we're on. I think that's the second one. I'll give you, before I came down here, I was up at the CNO staff, and I was working up there in OPNAV N95, which does our amphibious ship requirements. One of the things we were looking at was replacing our dock landing ships, or LSDs. They're kind of the trucks of the fleet. But as we looked at replacing those ships, that ship class, we had to look at what's future warfare going to look like. Should a ship be able to have independent command and control capability that a dock landing ship doesn't have today, where it stays close to its amphibious ready group because it really just carries a lot of cargo? So as we went through that, we could have went with a clean sheet design or a new ship designed from the ground up. But there was a lot of concern with that, with cost overruns. Would be able to keep the cost under control with a clean sheet design. When we had a fairly effective ship class that was out there with our LPD-17 San Antonio class. But the ship was not affordable at the cost it was at. So we had to de-scope that ship to be able to make it affordable. So it came down from a clean sheet design or a derivative of that LPD-17. So the analysis that went into that was looking at things like survivability, the command and control, the weapon system that were on it, the training that would go with it, the sustainment costs. All those kind of things went into that decision. And when we kind of put that together, kind of operate in different lines of effort, and pulled it together for the Commandant and the CNO, it was a fairly easy decision, and something that I would say would typically be a very emotional decision between the two services, between the Navy and the Marine Corps. But it was a fairly easy decision, and I think it was because we did so much research behind that, both here down at McCittick, but certainly the OPNAV staff with N81 working together on that. So I think that's an example. Another one we've got is what we call our internally transported vehicle. With MV-22s, it's giving us a lot of capability to go real far. The problem is the MV-22 goes real far, can carry passengers, but then when we get off, the Marines don't have vehicles with them. So we've got a requirement for internally transported vehicles, but the company that was building those went out of business. So the supply chain, the parts, is just a struggle to keep the readiness up as we watch the readiness continue to go down. We had to really make a decision. Do we just set that aside and go in a different direction and buy a new vehicle, commercial off the shelf? These are like ATV type vehicles. So they're not very technical, they're not high cost, but you have to figure out who's going to sustain them once you put them out in the fleet. So we kind of went through that analysis. They had to tow 120 millimeter mortar. Can the vehicles that are out there off the shelf do that? And as we kind of went through that and put all the analysis together, we came up with the right decision on what the mix would be. And I think that was a good example. That was, again, a very clear decision that a lot of decision makers wanted to go one way or another way. And at the end of the day, they agreed to kind of come together and understood because it was the analysis that went behind it. Right now, we're placing a couple of our main programs, our amphibious combat vehicle and our joint light tactical vehicle, or those are the new ones that are coming in. We also have our light armored vehicles that are getting kind of old, but we don't have the money to afford all three at this point in time. So we're trying to figure out what do we need to do to keep those vehicles going? How do we sustain them? How many do we need? What's the objective of how much quantity we need, how much we have to sink into the old vehicles, how much sustainment cost is that going to take, along with, or should we buy a new vehicle right now? And then the real curve that came in was, if we buy something right now and could afford something right now, we're kind of locked into that vehicle for the next 20 to 30 years. But with the technology we're seeing today, manned-unmanned teaming, active protection systems, a lot of the indirect precision fires, it's pretty darn close that we're going to be able to get that capability on the next generation vehicle. Kind of that leap ahead like you see on an F-35, what's the next ground vehicle? So the analysis really drove us to how many we should need in the inventory, how much does it cost us to sustain them, what's the capability of future vehicles, and what would it look like to replace what we have and buy the same technology but new today. Again, that was another one that was very easily, we went to the Commandant had one opinion, but when we brought in the analysis, we actually reversed his opinion based on the analysis we put behind that. So I think those are some examples of analysis with senior leadership on how you can do that. Planning to programming, I think, is another key area that I think is critical. When we end up working today, our capability portfolio management, working our requirements, working where we think the money should go, we've then got to turn that over to the programming process up in programs and resources, up at P&R, to turn that into the POM and then into finally the budget. Ensuring that we've got a resource-informed requirements so we can look at what those cost trades are, risk versus benefit, and where the money should go. It's really allowed McCitic here to be able to work very closely with programs and resources. The analysts that are up there with the analysts here, us working together, our capability integration officers or requirements officers working very closely with the programming analysts and budget analysts, explaining why we're doing it as we develop our Marine Corps capabilities investment plan that's resource informed. Analysis really helps us with that whole process. Another one that I think has been a real challenge for us, and I think if you looked at it, you might think that it would be more on the subjective or the art side, would be integration of women into our ground combat arms MOSs. Last year, the Secretary of Defense made the decision that we were going to integrate women into all our ground combat arms MOSs. So as we did that, we wanted to make sure that we maintained our standards and the capabilities, that we didn't lose any of our combat effectiveness. And if anything, we want to continue to get better, but at the same time, we want to have viable career paths for our Marines. So as we looked at that, one of the things we really came up with was we did not have a lot of standards in our current ground combat MOSs. We had some, but not anything really detailed along the lines of what you really needed to determine who should be in a particular ground combat arms MOS. So we had to do a lot of analysis on what it would take, what you should be doing to be able to be successful in a particular MOS. I'll give you an example of it is for artillery. We try to be light on the move, and sometimes when we're taking artillery, we take shots and we displace. Sometimes it's displace because we're maneuvering. Sometimes it's you displace because the enemy may target you and you have to maneuver, move away so you're not targeted with counter battery fire. As we look at that, as we displace and we limber up and displace, one of the tests that we came up with would be in a very user-applicable scenario would be Marines would have to take a 155 shell, which is about 100 pounds, be able to take that, carry it 50 meters, put it up onto the truck, go run over, get another one, put it up on the truck, and do 5 of those within 4 minutes. So that's just one example of many, many types of skill set or skills, screens or standards that we started to set up across all our MOSs to ensure that we've got Marines that can meet the standards. And what we were finding is a lot of, no, I shouldn't say a lot, but some of our male Marines were not making those standards. So if anything, it was meeting the Commandant's intent of making us more combat effective, but it was the analysis that went behind that people could understand and believe and see why we were doing what we were doing and modeling it correctly so we didn't make things too hard that we were losing a lot of the force unnecessarily. So I think that's an example of how we've used analysis too. And then the last one I would say is our forward deployed operations analysis. One of the things we did just several years ago with the new normal out there, and a lot of it was post-Benghazi, was to set up our special purpose Marine Air Ground Task Force crisis response that we set up in Rota, Spain, and over in Central Command. We set those up as new MAGTF task organized, tailored organizations. We had to send analysts forward to figure out the lay of the land, what the requirements would be, what's there, how would we support them. We analyzed, could they get afloat support, what would they be able to get ashore, what capabilities were needed, how do we sustain the readiness rates, and you could go on and on and on. That analysis has been very effective, and then we sent our analysts forward with each one of those special purpose MAGTFs to be able to continue to assess and make adjustments so we continue to keep readiness rates up and continue to meet our operational effectiveness. So you can see there's a lot of stuff that we do to use